Well, Democrats are scrambling now to keep the Build Back Better bill alive after West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin said he would vote no on the massive spending plan. Now, some progressives are suggesting that President Biden should step in and essentially take the whole thing over. In a new Washington Post op-ed titled "Broken Promises Can't Deter the Path to Build Back Better," Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal writes, quote, "We're calling on the president to use executive action to immediately improve people's lives. Taking executive action will also make clear to those who hinder Build Back Better that the White House and Democrats will deliver for Americans." Now, Maryland Democrat Senator Ben Cardin is saying this.
Are Democrats open to scaling it back even more or passing various pieces as standalones, maybe attracting Senator Manchin or even some GOP on some of these issues?
Well, that's a strategy decision that's being negotiated. We are open to a way to reach the finish line. We are prepared to move. We just need to make sure we have unanimity in our caucus, and that's what we're working on. And we will start on that next week when we return.
Joining me now is Iowa Republican Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks. She serves on the House Homeland Security Committee. Congresswoman, thanks so much for being with us. Let's rewind about 30 seconds into the beginning of this block. I want to ask you about Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who says that President Biden should take executive action to push through Build Back Better. What does that even mean? And if it was possible for the president to do this all along, why has Congress been dragging the American people along on this drama for the last year?
Well, I think it's the wrong approach. I mean, we've seen President Biden, when he came into office, have, over 40 executive actions, one of which was to stop construction of the Keystone pipeline. Another was to stop construction of the border wall and essentially open our borders. So they're dealing with multiple crises at the same time, but they're still trying to push through this progressive agenda, which there's bipartisan support both in the Senate and in the House against this bill. And Senator Joe Manchin has been very clear that he would not vote for the bill.
So essentially here, you seem to be saying that President Biden would be doing a big work around Congress if he went ahead and tried to push through his agenda via executive action. But it wouldn't even really have the sort of thrust of statutory authority here, right? Because what are his options? Is some kind of an executive order? That doesn't carry the weight of law.
Precisely. And, there is appropriations. So where would he get the appropriations in order to support the Build Back Better? Meanwhile, people have rising inflation. People are paying higher prices at the gas pump. They're paying higher prices at the grocery store. Bacon is up, tremendously for those of you who like bacon. So we need to really deal with the crises that we have now, whether it's inflation from this tax and spending bills that they pushed through already in just 1 year, whether it's the crisis at the border, whether it's the crisis in the Middle East with the Afghanistan withdrawal and the rising predominance of China. I mean, there are real issues that we need to be dealing with rather than, catering to the progressives on the left of the Democrat Party.
So back to Joe Manchin for a moment here. Because we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Joe Manchin in a segment, given the amount of political power he carries in Washington right now. So your party, Congresswoman, is sort of vigorously pursuing him now, trying to maybe woo him to cross party lines, throw in the towel, become a Republican. Mostly your Senate colleagues are behind this. Is this because they really believe in Joe Manchin's, policy proposals and they're 100% behind him, or is it more about retaking the Senate next year? Is it more of a kind of raw political calculation?
I think it's both of those things. One, they feel that he's currently more politically aligned with Republicans than he is with the progressive Democrats who are running the party and running the administration. And then two, because, they see that they can gain a majority. But I strongly feel that we're going to gain a majority in 2022, both in the House and in the Senate. And Senator Manchin is in a position of tremendous power in his party. But I also don't think he speaks only for himself. I think that he's the front person for other Democrat senators that are also against this Build Back Better bill. And then let's not forget the pandemic that you talked about in your last segment, where we have a president who's going to push out 500 million rapid antigen tests to give out free, which I heard you talk about the cost. But there's a Reuters article from Belgium, a Belgian study that shows the rapid antigen tests are not as accurate. And so we're pushing out a test and telling people to get tested for a test And I have half a dozen people I know who had congestion, tested with the rapid antigen test. It was negative. They got a fever the next day, tested with PCR, and it was positive. So I really think that we need to rethink that strategy on the pandemic, which they haven't controlled well either.
Interesting. And so maybe charging people hundreds of dollars isn't really following the science either on that issue. I want to ask you about the filibuster. Take a look at this from the Wall Street Journal. There's a new op-ed piece out here, or excuse me, there's new reporting out from the Wall Street Journal where President Biden sort of intimates that this might be a trick he's got up his sleeve. Can we pull that up on screen so our viewers can see? Oh, I'm hearing we don't have it, but essentially, Congresswoman, what's going on here is President Biden talked about what he's calling a tiny exception to the filibuster, which he might be willing to employ coming up during this calendar year if it's going to help him to get voting rights revisions across the finish line here. Have you ever heard anything about a small exception to the filibuster and what in the heck that means?
Well, let's just recall that there are no small steps. There are only big steps that lead to even bigger changes in the rules in the Senate. And the Senate is supposed to be the deliberative body. And if I recall correctly, both Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin has said they don't support the filibuster. So this may be part of the negotiations that he's having with Senator Manchin. But the Voting Rights Act is not going to make voting better, more accessible, or more accurate. So what it does is it violates and gets rid of all states' voter ID laws, which we know 78 to 80% of the population supports voter IDs. And it makes people secure and feel that their vote is trustworthy and confidential, and that it's accurate in being counted. So I think that there is not broad support for the voting rights bill, even though they term it that. We know that actually what it does is it will make our voting system more susceptible to fraud, and it will federalize our election system.
This is the tiny quote that I was looking for from this piece, Congresswoman. I just want to read it for you. I really like this. The Wall Street Journal op-ed says that President Biden touting a, quote, tiny exception to the filibuster is like an engineer saying he just wants to remove a little piece of the Hoover Dam. We got to leave it there. But thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.